There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon. This is episode number 172, and today we're back with another Rut Radio report in which we're sharing updates on current deer activity and behavior across the country this week. And we've got a very exciting story from one of our very own Wired to Hunt team members. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, brought to you by Sitka Gear. And we're back today with a new episode of our Rut Radio series. It's early October, and as we do on each week's Rut Radio episode, we're going to be checking in with a handful of deer hunters from all across the country to hear about deer activity, deer behavior, the conditions that are present right now, tactics that are working right now, and even thoughts on what we can expect in the coming days. So that's what we're going to be talking about here over the next half hour or so. And with me, as he is on each episode of Rut Radio, is a guy that I used to like a lot. A guy that maybe is making me very jealous, though, now. This man is named Spencer Newharth, and he is the man of the hour of the week. He is now reaching legendary status in my mind. Spencer, you pulled off a hunt of a lifetime, didn't you?
Yes, I am in a good mood today.
and I know we've got a bunch of guests that you have lined up that are going to talk about stuff all over the country, and I'm sure they're going to be great, but I don't give a damn right now. I just want to talk to you. I want you to tell us what happened to you the other day. What is your Rut Radio report for us today?
Well, Mark, I shot a big buck.
Come on, that's an understatement if I ever heard it. You killed a buck of just unbelievable proportions. You killed a giant. You killed the kind of buck that like makes me cry just a little bit. It's crazy.
Even when you were the killer, you cry a little bit. Emotion. So
yeah. So tell me everything. Tell me how did this hunt? Because when we talked last time, you had been talking about this public land western South Dakota hunt you were going on, and we had ambitions to share that on Instagram and all sorts of stuff. So maybe start there. Tell us what happened there, how your plans changed, and then how you ended up killing this buck in a totally different part of the state.
All right, well, we talked about it a little bit last time. I was going to go west. My idea there was to pick out some public ground that would be overlooked. And I was in the heart of mule deer country, but I was going to try to find some whitetails. So I focused on some ground that just looked like textbook whitetail habitat with river bottoms and hardwoods. Got there, having never seen it in person, and was immediately pretty turned off because there was a lot of cattle on it, and I knew that was a possibility, but until you see it and you scout a couple times and hunt it, it wasn't until then that I really lost confidence.
Mm-hmm. Man, that's exactly what happened to me in Montana.
Yeah, the area wasn't absent of deer, That wasn't the problem. The problem was that they were all on private ground. The public just couldn't compete with the lush grass and brush that was just on the other side of the fence. So there were deer there, and I suspect there will be in like 3 weeks when the cattle are out on the public. But for now, it just would not be a productive place to hunt. And so after like 3 days there, I cut the trip short and headed back east to where I'm from. And anytime in the fall you have free days, those free days are just too valuable to spend doing something that you don't have any confidence in. So that was why I decided to come back home.
Makes sense. So what happened then? What you ended up in the tree again, right?
Yes. So the stuff that I've been hunting for the last 5 or 6 years, since I've gotten really into archery hunting, I decided I was going to finish out my weekend hunting that stuff instead. We had hard south wind for 2 straight nights, and so the first night was Friday night. I got in the stand. I'm hunting a cornfield, and there was a lot of movement, and there was a lot of movement early, enough that made me want to come back the next night. And I can do that in this area because with that corn, I'm able to get in and out very easy. And so the following night, I came back, and it was a lot less action this time. But
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
Can you tell me about this specific setup? So you're on the edge of a cornfield, but why did you think this would be a good spot early season? Give me a few more details. I want to paint this picture in my mind.
Well, I like the idea of low-risk hunts right now. I want to be out in the woods, but I don't want to mess anything up for the end of October and beginning of November. And so this is a place, like I said, I'm confident I can get in and out of easily. I'm probably going to see deer. I'm not going to feel like I'm bored out of my mind. And it's just a low-risk area that I can hunt. In early season, it makes sense because there is a lot of corn there. And I have a love-hate relationship with corn, standing corn, that is. The pros of it is that it's a great insulator for the deer. There's roads around and homes, and they can be in that corn and have no idea any of that stuff is going on. Like I said, I can get in and out very easy with that standing corn. And the cons of it, though, are that it's too good of an insulator sometimes. The deer can find a low spot in there, and they can bed in a slough, and they can eat the corn. You'll never see them until come harvest. The other problem is getting a shot in those situations. If that deer is even in the first row of corn, he could be 10 yards away, but I'm not going to have a shot. It's just really hard to get an arrow in there. And so I picked the corn with not a lot of confidence, but I thought I would still see deer, and that would be a nice change of pace from what I was just doing out west.
Yeah. And did you know that were there mature bucks in the area to your knowledge? Did you have some deer on camera or that you'd scouted that you knew about or anything like that?
So this was my year of minimalist scouting. I just got married in June. I moved into a new house in August. And so my scouting kind of by choice and because I had no choice was almost nothing. In this area in particular, I didn't even have a camera up yet this year. And I was planning on hanging one this weekend. Never got around to it, obviously. So I was just hunting this based off historical sits. I knew there would be deer around, but no. To answer your question, I did not know there was a deer of this caliber there.
Okay. So you go in, it's a low-impact hunt. It's a good general area for early season movement, but you weren't going to mess better things up, too early. And you're hanging and hunting based on historical data. And now it's day number 2.
Yes, and I did not have the same action that I had the night before, but it was 7:20 p.m. Sunset was at 7:10, so we were in that last, half hour of daylight, and it was the golden hour, and here comes this big buck up the ridge, far down the cornfield. When I first saw him, it was 200 yards. So I get my binos on him, and immediately I know this is a shooter. The problem is he's coming straight at me, walking.
Can you just you pull your binos up, you see this is a shooter. What else can you tell me about what this deer looks like? Can you describe this buck? Because he's worth describing.
So although, like I said, I didn't know that he was around this year, I knew this buck from 2014, and When I pulled up the binos, I knew who he was, and he has a very distinguished kicker on his right G2, and then he has these big bladed brow tines, and so I knew who he was right away. And then he just has a really heavy and wide mainframe 4x4. So I knew this buck, and I didn't spend much time looking through the binoculars at him because he was walking right at me, and I didn't want to make any extra movement. So I glassed him for a couple seconds, put the binos away, and got ready. And I was just tore up watching him come in because, I mean, I like to think that buck fever doesn't get me, but it does. And
yeah,
I had to watch him for probably 5 or 6 minutes make his way towards me, and at any point he could have hit a trail and went into the corn and been gone. And I thought he was going to do that the entire time, but he kept coming. He was at 150 and then 100, and I thought, man, this might happen. And he keeps coming, and all of a sudden he's at 25 yards. Same thing though, he's coming right at me. So I don't have a shot. And he pauses and messes around, and then he's at 20, 15, 10. I still don't have a shot. Yes. So I'm just, at this point, I'm going to let him walk by me and see if I can get a shot after he's beyond me. I did not set this stand up with the intention of smoking a deer at 8 yards, but that was what ended up happening. At 8 yards, he finally turned. He gave me a quartering 2 shot, and I was able to sneak an arrow right behind his shoulder. But I knew it was a good hit. I saw the arrow have a clean pass through, and he turned and ran. The problem with a deer being at 8 yards, when you draw back, it's all body in your line of vision, and so it can be hard to distinguish what was a good shot because the time between you releasing the arrow and pulling your head back to see where the arrow hits, it's nothing. I felt confident though. I saw the arrow go through. He takes off. He does a U-turn and runs back about 50 yards, and I didn't see him come from beyond this tree, and so I knew he at least bedded down there or was maybe down altogether. I waited about 15 minutes and grabbed my arrow. Because it was so windy, it was like 25-mile-an-hour winds that night, I knew I could slip out of my stand, check the arrow, and see what was going on. Well, I had dark blood that I thought was a heart shot because I knew I hit him low, and so I gave him a little bit more time, and I snuck up to where I saw him go in, and sure enough, he was laying there. Problem was, he picks up his head that I thought I thought his head laying down was him dead. It was not. Picks up his head, looks at me, jumps out of his bed, and runs over the ridge. So then I was even more tore up. I knew I knew I messed up. It was a very amateur thing to do, but I just had to deal with it. So I backed out, called a couple buddies, gave him 2 hours. We came back, picked up blood, and found him within 30 minutes. He only went a couple 100 yards, and he was down. And he had been down for a while. I just should not have got him out of that first bed, but I was extremely relieved.
So did the shot end up being where you thought it was, and he just survived longer than you would have expected, or were you a little farther back, or what do you think?
It was low, like I thought. The problem with those quartering 2 shots like this was I missed his heart by a half an inch, but I caught so much of the rest of his body. I got lung, liver, and then on the exit, it took some guts with it too. And so just missing the heart a little bit on a quartering 2 shot can result in you catching everything else. So
yeah, and probably just the one lung too, right? And those deer notoriously can last longer than you would think.
It does, yeah. Luckily, everything inside of him was soup, and it had pooled up, and he left me a pretty good trail. So I was able to pick up the trail and find him. I had to be more aggressive than I wanted to, though, knowing that after I jumped out of his bed, it was a liver hit. You'd like to give those deer, ideally, 3, 4, 5 hours, but we had rain coming at 1 a.m. So if I was going to find him based off blood, I was going to have to go in sooner than I wanted. But it worked out, thankfully.
Yeah, it sure did. What was that moment like when you did walk up on him?
Man, it was a happy moment. In the last year, I've gotten married. I moved into a new house. I saw my favorite team, the Vikings, play. I saw my favorite country artist, Garth Brooks, play. And just nothing can replicate this. Like, there's just no other thing in the world that can give you this kind of feeling. Like,
don't let your wife hear that. Oh man, I'm so happy for you, man. When you sent me that picture, I just freaked. He is if anyone listening right now hasn't seen this deer, you got to head over to either Spencer's social media or the Wired Hunt Facebook page and check out this buck. Just a beautiful, beautiful deer. I mean, and just, I mean, like you said, he's an 8-pointer basically with junk. Just a monstrous, massive 8-pointer with flyers off his twos and these crazy huge brow tines. And not to mention, maybe as impressive, if not more impressive, is he is so mature. I mean, that one picture where you've got him pointed towards the camera, his face just kind of smushes into his huge neck and chest. I mean, just a Brahma bull of a deer, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and so like I said, I knew this deer from 2014, and at that time I thought he was probably 3.5 or 4.5, making him 6.5 or 7.5 now. He scored 166 and 2/8, and that was bigger than I thought. When I walked up on him, I was thinking 150s, because he is an 8-pointer. It's hard to reach any higher than that. But his width and the extra stuff he had going on pushed him to that point.
Was that net or gross?
That was his gross score, was the 166 and 2/8.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, shoot. I mean, from looking at these pictures, I would have guessed bigger than that. Like when you sent me an original estimation that was higher than that, and I believed you. I was like, holy smokes, no doubt. This thing looks like a booner plus some. But so I was surprised to hear when the final came in at 166. Either way, I mean, it's a giant deer. 166-inch mainframe 8-pointer. Are you kidding me? Man, I'm just I'm very happy for you, dude. Awesome hunt. Way to get it done. Now, this is Rut Radio, and we are trying to figure out, what's happening right now, why are things happening right now. So do you have any, have you had time to analyze the situation at all? Like, why do you think movement was the way it was those 2 days you were hunting that was pretty good? Why do you think you killed him? Was there any, outside condition or any other factor you can point to?
I think it's a combination of a couple things. One of the big ones being is just the low pressure. Typically, I'd be in there in June, hanging a camera or hanging, 3 or 4 cameras. I'd be in there in July, hanging stands. I'd be in there in August, checking cameras. And I didn't do any of that. I mean, when I killed him, that was literally my second time on the property this year. As far as why they were moving so well, other reasons. One, I think it's just been the stability and the mild conditions. We have been in this long stretch now of mid 60s for a high and high 40s for a low, and I think that just kept him on any kind of pattern. It didn't mess with it all. We didn't have any crazy rainstorms or 100-degree days and stuff like that. And then the stability part is just that all the crops in that area have kind of stayed how they are. We haven't had anybody cutting silage yet or taking out beans at this point. So I think those deer just felt really comfortable moving around.
Yeah. So Spencer, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the deer activity that night?
A 166 in 2 days.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Well, awesome stuff, dude. So I want to say 2 things here. Number 1, I'm proud to say that I am forcing you into having a longer Rut Radio episode than you typically like. You are now approaching, by the time this is all said and done, because I know how long the usual things go, you're going to be approaching regular Wired to Hunt episode length, which I know you like to rag on us about. So I gotcha there. And secondly, with that being the case, I guess we should probably move on to our regularly scheduled programming. So what do we have in store?
Well, we start in New York with David Giarizzo from Tag and Brag, and then we go to northern Minnesota to talk to Mike Fitzgerald from Bow Hunter Die. Then we talk to Lindsey Thomas Jr. of QDMA in Georgia, and then we go to Oklahoma to talk to Clay Forrest of Stewart Ranch Outfitters.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear these. I will give you a 10 to 15 second Michigan Rut Radio update, I guess, since I'm here. this past weekend was opening weekend in Michigan. We had these decently cooler temperatures that we were, seeing in the forecast. This cold front finally dropped from like the 80s into the mid 60s. It resulted in pretty good movement. I've heard from a number of people across the state that movement was pretty decent, maybe not excellent, but pretty good. Saw a lot of does, no bucks on opening night, and that's kind of what it's looking like the rest of the week. It's kind of middling temperatures, mid 60s, some bumping up into the 70s, so I'm not expecting terrific hunting conditions, but I'm anxiously awaiting the next cold front. So that's all I got, Spencer.
Well, I will leave it with this in on our intro. I had a friend of my dad tell me, he said, man, you shot a huge turkey this year and you shot a big buck and you got married. It's all downhill from here. So
yeah.
Going to be a long fall now.
I think you are absolutely right. So you don't even need to bother hunting anymore. You can just record podcast episodes from here on out, okay? All right, buddy. Talk to you later.
Talk to you next week, Mark. Before we get to our first update, though, let's pause for a word from our sponsors at Sitka Gear. And joining us this week is Sitka Ambassador Alex Templeton, who tells us about some much-needed tree stand therapy after a long week of elk hunting.
So I was invited on a trip with one of my good friends out to Colorado for the month of September in 2014, and our plan was to spend almost a whole month out there bow hunting elk. And this was my first experience elk hunting, and after hiking many, many miles up and down the mountains of Colorado, battling hot weather, cold weather, no bugles, and a bunch of other factors, I never ended up killing an elk, and I was super disappointed in myself. Obviously, I wanted to go out there and get it done, and I couldn't do it, and came back home to Missouri, and on my very first sit back at home in a tree stand, I ended up killing the biggest deer I had ever killed with my bow. It was a buck that I had been watching all summer named Browse, and he had 9.5-inch brow tines on both sides, and I went from the lowest of lows to the highest of highs in a matter of one sit back in my stand, so it was great.
On Alex's hunt, she was wearing Sitka's Equinox pants and Celsius jacket. If you'd like to create a Sitka story of your own, or to learn more about Sitka's technical hunting apparel, visit sitkagear.com. And joining us on the line first is David Giarizzo, the co-founder of Tag and Brag. Now, David, in New York, what would you say the deer activity has been on a scale of 1 to 10 lately?
Honestly, the past week, I think it's going to be like an 8 or an 8.5. And the only reason I don't push it a little higher than that is because we didn't see a ton of mature buck activity. But the deer were out all over the place the past couple days for us. We had some great activity. The food plots were heating up, and we saw some scrape activity. I mean, we were seeing 14 to 18 deer a night, and where we're typically seeing 5 to 6 is can be a good night up there for the most part in New York. So this weekend, the deer activity was extremely high.
Well, those sound like some really productive sits, but is that what you would expect for early October, or is this year been an outlier for you guys?
You know what? It's been a little bit of an outlier. Honestly, we don't typically see the movement pick up on our property up there in New York until probably mid to late October because it's a lot of thick cover. So we kind of think of it as the breeding grounds. Once those bucks start cruising and start expanding their home ranges, we see a lot more deer activity in there. But it was really intriguing to see this much activity, this early in the year. I think a lot of it had to do with the food plots that we've planted and really dialing those in, giving them cover for the food plots so they're not pressured from the road has definitely helped. But the weather conditions this weekend were absolutely perfect with the cold front that we saw kind of come through the Midwest and then hit us up in New York.
You mentioned the food plots a couple times now. What do you have growing there that you think the deer have, been so attracted to?
So we have a combination of a brassicas blend, a lot of turnips, and then clover. And we found that the deer were in the turnips, but ultimately they'd feed through the turnips and spend a majority of their time in the clover, which was, it's cool to see that because we were up in a redneck line just kind of observing a lot this weekend. We didn't really, get too aggressive. We just wanted to see what the deer movement was about and where the deer were coming out and what they were feeding on. And it was pretty intriguing to see that they were pretty sanctioned on the clover once they kind of established themselves in the food plots.
Is this a new pattern for them, hitting the food plots so hard, or is this something you've been seeing for the last month?
It's the last month they've been hitting the food plots pretty hard. I would say the daylight activity has really ramped up in the last week or so. And, once again, I think a lot of that is because of how colder it got over the last week. We had 2 or 3 days in a row of a frost in the morning up in New York. So the morning activity was extremely high, which I was pretty surprised about, actually. I mean, we were seeing a lot of deer between like 7:30 in the morning and 9:30, 7:30 and 9:30 in the morning. We were seeing probably a bulk of the activity through the day in that period of time. And then as it warmed up over the last couple of days, the movement in the afternoon seemed to get closer and closer to dark. Where we sat on Saturday just to sit. It wasn't even season yet. We just jumped up in the redneck to kind of just look over the food plots and see where the deer were moving for opening day on Sunday, and we saw a ton of deer starting at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So they were on their feet pretty early when it was cold out.
You mentioned that the deer activity has been great, but not so much for buck activity. What do you think those mature bucks are doing right now, if you're not seeing them in daylight?
I think they're still holding tight. I think we're starting to see they're kind of just breaking off of the younger bachelor groups that they were with throughout the summertime. So a lot of the mature bucks that we're seeing on camera now are by themselves. And a lot of the younger bucks are still together that that we've kind of observed over the weekend. So I think they're just kind of coming into their own. They're really starting to feel their hard horns. They're starting to feel their hormones and stuff. And they're kind of sanctioning themselves because, they know and they can feel what the next couple weeks is going to bring.
Well, going forward, David, in New York, what do you expect the buck activity to be on a scale of 1 to 10 in this coming week?
Honestly, this week, I think the buck activity is going to go down to like a 5 or a 6, especially with the warmer temperatures. I think you're going to start to see a lot more night activity. The bucks, especially the mature ones, are going to start and continue to be more nocturnal. We're at this point, we're going to kind of sit back and wait for that next little cold spell to come in, a rain front or something, just to kind of change up the weather patterns a little bit, to hopefully spark something and get these bucks moving a little bit more.
Well, I will be watching for some tag and brag videos and look forward to the rest of you guys this season. Thanks for joining me, David.
Awesome, Spencer. I appreciate you having us on.
Okay, and joining us on the line next is Bow Hunter Die team member Mike Fitzgerald. Now, Mike, in Minnesota, what would you say the deer activity has been on a scale of 1 to 10 lately?
I would say this last week here, I would put it probably at a 7. We're kind of early October here, approaching the quote-unquote lull, but I've been seeing some pretty good activity on my cameras and talking with people around the state through our forums. It seems like guys are seeing some buck activity more so than previous years.
Well, Mike, I know you hunt in northern Minnesota. Just for reference to our listeners, will you explain the kind of setups that you have there and what the properties look like that you hunt on?
Yeah. So I'm up here. I'm about 14 miles from the Canadian border near Ely, Minnesota. And we're the, definition of big woods wilderness hunting. Our densities aren't that great compared to other areas of the state, but it's just a byproduct of the environment that we're in. The closest thing that I have to a concentrated food source up here would be a clear cut that the Forest Service or private properties have done. The deer survive entirely on natural browse. There are hardly even food plots around here. But if you take a drone shot or a satellite image of our area, it's all trees. It's mostly pine, but we have some aspen and birch in there. Very, very few oaks. There's a couple of scrub oaks on the property that our resort sits on here. And when I say very few, I mean there's like 4 trees that I think I've ever found in that 80 acres. So they have a lot of natural browse. They like to feed on hazelnut bushes is one of their favorite things this time of year. now that the leaves are dropping, those young aspen trees get hammered pretty hard from now through the winter, really. So that's where those clear cuts come in handy a lot.
Well, are you seeing any October sign yet as far as scrapes and rubs?
I'm finding a few of them. No big concentrations. In my area, and again with the deer density that I have, a lot of the sign I see, those scrapes and rubs, have more to do with the buck's particular personality. I've had a buck in this area a few years back that was just a scrape making machine, and come like the second week of October through the ruts, you couldn't walk 50 yards in any direction without running into one of his scrapes. And ever since I shot him, I haven't found nearly the concentration of scrapes that I did when he was around. But they're starting to show up. I'm seeing a little bit of activity. I'm actually seeing a lot more daytime buck activity this year than previous years, and so that makes me hopeful. And that's probably why I said this timing a 7 out of 10 is we're just not used to seeing mature bucks during daylight, so it's promising.
Well, you talked about the randomness of food sources. Does that equate to a randomness in bedding too, or is that usually the same?
Yeah, they're for most of the season they can feed anywhere, they can bed anywhere. They have like whitetails anywhere, they like to have comfort of thick cover, but you can find that within 100 yards circumference of just about anywhere that you're standing. As the temperatures drop, you can find them bedding on south-facing slopes a little bit more. If we have a hot early fall week, the opposite of that, you get them on those ridges facing north where they get a little bit more shade throughout the day. But outside of that, it's hard. If you're going to put some miles on to get back into the woods, you're going to bump deer. There's just no way around it.
How about going forward? What do you think the deer activity is going to be in a scale of 1 to 10 in this coming week or so?
I would probably maybe drop it to a 5 or 6. We're kind of hitting that, whether you buy into the October lull or not, we're hitting that time where they're really starting to adjust. Bucks are going to start doing a lot of different traveling. So this is, over the next week or two, you might start seeing some of these bucks that you haven't seen, haven't been on your camera, some new bucks, and the ones that have been there, they might be disappearing for a week or so. It seems as we start approaching towards that end of October, they get a little bit of anxiousness, and they'll go for a few days. They'll take a big loop somewhere into a new area they're starting to get jonesing for that first doe to come in, and they'll go anywhere where they think they might find that doe.
All right, well, thanks for joining me, Mike, and good luck in the big woods this fall.
Hey, thanks, Butcher. I appreciate it.
Before we get to our next caller, though, let's pause to thank our sponsors at Whitetail Properties. And this week with Whitetail Properties, we are joined by Andrew Schultz, who is going to be telling us about what advice he has for buyers who are looking at land in a competitive market like Illinois.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things to consider when buying a piece of property, but a few of the main things that I would definitely be thinking about are, number one, have your financing in order. By doing that, you're positioned well to present offers to the seller, and it proves that you're serious and ready to go, so that helps a lot. Know what you're looking for in a property. There's lots of properties out there, but it's going to help if you know specifics of exactly what you're looking for, what's attractive to you, and what's unattractive. When you're buying a farm, remember first and foremost that it's an investment. It's easy to fall in love with a property, especially one that you seem to like, but look for a return on that property. Look for the ability to resell it in the future if you need to, and that's going to be important as well when buying a farm.
If you'd like to learn more and to see the properties that Andrew currently has listed for sale, visit whitetailproperties.com/Schultz. That's SCHULTZ. Okay, and joining us on the line next is Lindsey Thomas Jr., the Director of Communications for QDMA. Now, Lindsey, in Georgia, what would you say the deer activity has been lately on a scale of 1 to 10?
It's Spencer, I'd say on a 1 to 10 scale, we've got a couple of different things going on right now. I'd say the activity has been higher, more of a 4 to 5 in coastal Georgia, where the rut is going to be happening sooner. We have a mid-October to late October rut in our coastal counties, so things are already picking up there. In the rest of the state, I'm a little less optimistic in terms of activity, more of a 2 to 3. It's still fairly dry. We are still a few weeks off from the rut in most of Georgia, which is going to be in early to mid-November, and some areas of the state like southwest Georgia where it's even later into December. So right now, in terms of rut activity, that's on the coast where they're approaching soon. But most of the rest of the state is still waiting.
All right, well, you talked about it being dry right now. Is the whole state feeling that effect, even where those deer are rutting at?
Yes. Hurricane Irma passed through on September 11th. Did a lot of damage, of course, and dumped a ton of rain. But that's the last rain we've had in Georgia, and there's not any in the forecast for the next several days. So things are starting to get dry again quickly. Folks who had already planted food plots, those food plots are going to be struggling here soon. And then I know a lot of people, too, that were waiting to plant until there was some more moisture on the horizon, and they're still waiting. We've got a bumper acorn crop, so, there's plenty of food out there. It's not a critical situation. We're not back in serious drought conditions, but it's definitely dry. And, of course, walking in the woods, hunters know it sounds like you're walking on potato chips getting into your tree stand. But not critical from a drought standpoint yet, but definitely getting dry.
Well, what are hunters seeing in the area for your typical rutting sign as far as scrapes and rubs?
Again, seeing more of that right now. I was down at my family's land in southeast Georgia on September 16th and did some bow hunting. It was still very hot then. A lot of water still around from the hurricane, but there were scrapes evident. Again, like I said, down there in coastal Georgia, we have a mid-October rut peak to mid to late October. So the rubs and scrapes were already happening. And, a lot of scrapes that I saw had water standing in them and did not appear to have been worked since Irma passed through on September 11th. I've talked to some other friends who have got lots of trail camera pictures of bucks working scrapes in coastal Georgia over the last week or two, even some folks who believe they saw bucks tending some does already in coastal Georgia. So, we're approaching the peak on that in that area of the state. Elsewhere, where I live is in mid to north Georgia, and most hunters I've talked to in those areas are seeing what I'm seeing here, which is some very tentative early scrape activity, just a few scrapes here and there being worked and only lightly, and a few rubs out there. Hank Forrester, who's our Hunting Heritage Programs Manager, was hunting this weekend with a person he was guiding who's a new hunter, and that was part of our Field to Fork program. And they killed, Evan, who was the hunter, killed his first deer. It was a nice 2.5-year-old buck here in North Georgia. And Hank said the buck was just sort of meandering around, feeding on acorns, and no tarsal staining whatsoever. Myself hunting this weekend did not see any bucks, but didn't get a feel that really much rut activity to speak of. Brian Grossman, who works with me, was hunting a public land hunt with his daughter this weekend in West Georgia. Same thing, very sparse scrape and rub activity right now. So again, we're looking at a early to mid-November rut peak, so we're several weeks out from really getting hot and heavy, but it is beginning to pick up.
Lindsay, let's do a hypothetical. Let's say that the state gets an inch of rain here this next week. How does that change things for hunters and change things for deer?
For hunters, a lot of hunters are going to be happy. They're either going to be planting food plots that they were waiting to plant, or food plots that were in the ground are going to green up. So that will certainly change the game in terms of hunting strategy around food plots, particularly as we go into the approach of our opening of gun season around October 21st. But we've got a bumper acorn crop, particularly white oaks, and generally what I've found is if you've got those in the woods and they're falling, deer are generally going to choose those before they're going to choose food plots. So I think from a strategy standpoint, you need to pay attention to that. If you've got white oaks in your area, and I think this would go for most of the southeast here, don't continue to expect your food plot to be an attraction. Watch the browse pressure on the food plot, and if you're not seeing the browse pressure, I wouldn't be hunting there or hunting patterns around those plots. until you begin to see pressure build there. The deer are going to be where the acorns are falling.
Well, we just talked a little bit about what the deer activity might turn into, but what do you think on a scale of 1 to 10 that deer activity is going to be in this next week or so?
We've got some cool temperatures now where we did not have those before, and I think it's going to be nicer to be in the woods, but we're going to be seeing more rut activity coming on in the next week or two. I'm hoping, by next week we're going to be looking at a 5 to 6 on deer activity in most of middle and north Georgia, and coastal Georgia should be seeing up in the 7s, I would guess, by next week. And then by the approach of opening day of gun season on the 21st, should be 8 or 9. That's going to be right in the peak of breeding for most of coastal Georgia.
Well, Lindsay, you're clearly as plugged in as anybody there. So thank you for joining me this week, and I hope you guys get that rain.
Thanks a lot, Spencer. Good luck to you too.
And joining us on the line last is Clay Forrest, the manager of Stewart Ranch Outfitters in Oklahoma. Now, Clay, what would you say the deer activity has been on a scale of 1 to 10 lately?
In the last week or 10 days, it's picked up. I call it probably about a 4, maybe a 5 right now. I'm in the southwest part of the state, and we had a really good summer as far as rainfall, and we weren't seeing a lot of deer movement coming to protein or corn feeders all summer, I believe, just because of the natural vegetation out there. So in about the last week, we've had a wheat coming up, and that's really increased our deer movement in the last probably week or 10 days.
Previous to that wheat coming up, what were the deer hitting for food sources?
Just natural vegetation. Like I said, we have a lot of greenbriers, pretty popular around here. We've got just a lot of just native grasses, for lack of a better word. We don't have much of a mass crop here, so deer really stay in the CRP or big native grass fields, and that's kind of where they bed and live pretty much all summer long.
Well, are those wheat fields what you will be queuing in on basically throughout the season, or does that change?
No, that's our main point of interest. Travel corridors coming in and out of wheat fields. Do a lot of glassing, getting up on big high points and glassing on wheat fields. So that's definitely our main focus as far as trying to get big deer killed throughout the season.
Are you seeing any sign making pop up right now as far as rubs and scrapes?
Not really. Kind of like I said in the beginning, we really kind of struggled just to see deer in general this summer. Like I said, we had close to somewhere between 9 and 12 inches of rain from about May 15th to basically last week, and some of the grass out here is over our head. So really seeing a lot of sign, it has been kind of detrimental as far as that, just because of what Mother Nature did this summer. So not really, in a long rambling answer.
Well, Clay, at Stewart Ranch Outfitters there, I know you guys run a lot of cattle. How does that affect the deer movement? When you guys start moving those cattle around, do you see the deer move into where those cattle just came off of?
We do, and it's a really cohesive unit for us as far as the cattle and the deer. I mean, there are times where cattle might kind of deter some deer hunting, but that's very, very small percentage. So, to your point, cattle coming off some pasture where it's been grazed down, we'll definitely see more deer sign in that pasture just because it's been grazed off previous to. So we really do try to do a good job as far as managing where cattle are going to be in relation to where our deer hunting areas or our primary deer hunting areas are at. So we try to run our cattle there in the summertime and get them off for the fall and the winter. So we can hunt and not have any worries about a cow coming underneath the stand or something like that. But it really works well for us. We do try to do a good job of that.
Now, going forward in this next week or so, what do you think the deer activity is going to be in Oklahoma on a scale of 1 to 10?
I'm going to probably put it around a 4, maybe a 5. We're expecting a little bit more rain this week. Like I said, wheat pasture's up. It's greened up pretty well in the last, like I said, about 10 days. So I would expect to see a lot of deer in those green fields, movement pretty decent. So I would probably put it about a 4 to 5.
Well, Clay, I look forward to seeing the pictures from Stewart Ranch, and good luck this fall.
Thanks, Spencer. Sure appreciate it.
And that concludes this week's episode of Wired to Hunt's Rut Radio. We'd like to thank our sponsors at Sitka, Whitetail Properties, Matthews, Yeti, Huntera, Whitetail Institute, Maven, and Trophy Ridge. And if you'd like to see that buck I just harvested, check out my Instagram at Spencer Newharth. We thank you all for listening, and as always, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. You ever get that feeling the walls closing in, the concrete jungle suffocating you? You crave some wide open spaces, the chance to connect with nature, maybe in a spot all your own. Well, head over to land.com. They've got ranches, forests, mountains, streams, you name it. Search by acreage. You can search by location. You can search by the kind of hunting and fishing you're dreaming of. Land.com. It is where the adventure begins.